Hey Potters, welcome back to Pottery Plus. I've been thinking a lot lately about the habits that I used to try and help my students make when they were first starting to throw on the wheel. And I just thought I would do a quick video about it today. Some of the things that I used to share with them that I observed over my years of teaching, that once we kind of figured them out, I think they really helped people. So I thought I would just share them today. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing is keep your chair, your water bucket, your pedal, keep them close to you or scooch up in a way that feels comfortable so that you're close to the wheel and you're not reaching or stretching. As we know, throwing is already a pretty physical thing, so you don't want to create extra strain on your body by reaching. And the other thing I used to always notice with my students was sometimes people were really shy about the water in their water bucket. And when I say shy, I mean they would only put in an inch worth of water, and I would always joke and say, friends, we have plenty of water, but fill your bucket up, especially if you're using a deeper bucket. Mine's kind of a sort of a half shallow pan sort of a bucket, but if you're using a deep one, you don't want to have to be reaching down really far into your bucket to access your water. So don't be shy with the water. Just get everything where it feels comfortable for you, basically, and you're not setting up extra added strain on your body. Okay? The next thing is try to get used to only touching the clay when it's moving. Okay, when the clay is still, you're gonna knock it off center because you're not getting even access and pressure on the clay. And I know, because I was a beginner too. It feels awkward at first, the motion of the wheel, and you kind of want it to stop so that you can make adjustments. But I promise you, when you touch the clay when it's still, you're just gonna bump it off center. So try not to let yourself get into the habit of that and make adjustments when the clay is moving. And even if you just need to slow down your wheel speed, that's okay. Sometimes that can feel better than keeping it at the speed you're at, but it's also a better option than completely stopping. Okay? And I'll kind of show you here in a minute what happens when you touch the clay when it's still and it's this saturated. And that's kind of what creates that, friends. It's when we're working on the wheel, we're using a lot of water, and so it makes the clay sort of weak. So when you touch it and it's still, it's going to be even more responsive than normal because it's so saturated and weakened in a way. Next, I wanted to talk about getting in the habit of keeping your foot on the pedal. And I was going to talk about this during this step because I'm about to open my pot. And when I open my pot, meaning make the hole that I will then put my hands into to form the walls, I like to increase my wheel speed a little bit. And because I have my foot on my pedal at all times, I can do that when I need to, and then I can slow it back down a little bit. Now, I like to increase speed on that step because it's an easy part to knock it off center, so I like to try and get it done quickly. It's also a lot of pressure on your thumbs. So increasing my wheel speed helps me to be able to do that a little bit more quickly. But anyway, all of that to say, I used to notice a lot of times students would want to set their pedal to a moderate speed and then move the pedal out of the way because then their feet were both flat on the floor, and I understand that feels a little bit more comfortable. But try to get into the habit of using the pedal because it just gives you a little bit more control. And if you need something to even out your foot placement, you can just put something underneath the foot that's not on the pedal to kind of even you out a little bit, balance you out a little bit if you need that. I have my right foot on my pedal, and my left foot is I'm always kind of arching it up, which is just a habit I've gotten into. It's probably not the best for my posture and things, but that's kind of how my body's figured out how to do it. So I'm just opening my pot now. And this is a good moment to talk about our next habit to get into, which is stay at the appropriate part of the wheel for your dominant hand. So if you've been here before, I know you've heard me say this a million times, but I'm a righty, so my wheel moves counterclockwise and I stay at 4 o'clock. If you're lefty, it's opposite. Your wheel head is gonna be going clockwise, you're gonna be at 8 o'clock. And sometimes people have tried to I've heard people try to argue about this, but the thing is, there's a reason why we do it this way, and it's because in these positions, we say that they're correct, and I'm always saying, everything's open to interpretation. Someone's always doing something weird that's working somehow, so, But for the most part, this works because the clay is going out and away from your fingers in those two positions with the wheel going the correct direction. So we like that because then the clay is not pushing back towards us and pushing our fingers towards us and creating added friction. Okay, so I've had students say, well, I like to do it that way. And with adults, you just have to be like, okay, but that is the reason why. And that can kind of help it seem like more logical why we do it that way. Because this way, the clay is going away from me. So I can pinch it and control it and shape it, but it's not gonna be pushing back towards me. It's just going out and away from me. Okay, so that's why the 4 o'clock, 8 o'clock thing. Next, I wanted to quickly talk about how you sort of like get on and off of the clay. I haven't come up with like exactly the right words for this. Sometimes I used to say like mount and dismount with my students, but that seems kind of, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to use those terms anymore. But basically, what I'm talking about is this. Sometimes when we start to work with the clay, or we start touching it, basically, we kind of like jump onto it, and that's an easy way to knock it off center. Same way as when you take your hands off of it. So like, for example, something I used to see a lot when I was teaching is people would come off and they would kind of swipe, like a swiping motion like that, or things like that. So just make sure that when you're coming on and off of the clay, basically you kind of want to, like, I always think of a record player, like the needle going down on a record player. It's like you just want to be very, very kind of still and steady and intentional. And then when you take your hands away from it, like same thing. It's just a real gentle release. You don't want to kind of like jump off of it. So yeah, that's something you can, if you're noticing that you're getting off center, like at this point in the process, that might be something to look out for. Fully get this floor spread out as much as I wanted to down there. Okay, that's better. All right, so now I'm going to start to pull my balls up like you do. Nothing fancy here. If you need to see how to do this, I have a video that goes more in depth with this, but again, we're just kind of focusing on habits to make or break today. So the next one I wanted to talk about as I'm starting to pull my walls up is you want to make sure that when you're first learning this step, pulling the walls up, you want to make sure that you're not just pulling kind of mindlessly. So sometimes when we first learn and we first start feeling that clay move, it's really exciting and it's fun, and you just kind of keep pulling without really thinking about it. So what I used to always tell my students is stop and assess. So like I'm going to do right now, and I'm going to even put my hands in and kind of feel around. I can see that I've gotten some height out of this pot, and I definitely felt it stretch out under my fingers. But I think there's still a little bit hanging out at the bottom that I could try to take care of. So I'm going to do a pull where I focus my pressure on the bottom, and then I'm going to be gentle moving up through the rest of the pot because I can feel that it's pretty thin. So kind of, feel, think through the process before you just pull and pull and pull, because unfortunately what happens is if you just pull too much, you pull it so thin that it'll collapse. And that's not the end of the world. We all lose some pots when we're beginning. In fact, I lost a lot. I don't know if I've talked about this on here, y'all, but I was like, when I was in college and I was learning, I was the slowest one in my class. So I had a lot of failed pots. Like everyone was getting it before me. But I got it. I got there eventually. Okay, so I'm going to come off of that really nice and gentle. And I think that's all the pulling I need to do. My walls are good, so I can stop there. Now, one thing I did want to point out here is kind of back on the topic of like getting your hands on and off of the clay. When you're pulling walls like this and they start to get thin, it's very important that when your hands are coming up and off that top edge, you keep your hands in that position, like that. Okay, record player, on and off, really gentle and steady. So sometimes I'll kind of see people like, they get to the top and they get excited, which is understandable, but they kind of go like, oh, and just sort of knock it slightly off center. So anyway, again, just something else to look out for. Pull all the way up and off the top. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is trimming the bottom if you're doing the trimming method where you're trimming like at this stage where it's wet, it's still stuck to the bat, and you just want to get away a little bit of that excess that you're not going to be able to pull up through the walls of the pot. And the habit here is go slow. And I don't mean with your wheel, I mean with your hand. So when you're digging in, kind of to where like any excess that's hanging around at the bottom sort of starts, or like at the top of it, you just want to dig in, and then you just move that tool down to the wheel so slowly. Like so slowly, and you're taking off so little material. So I know it seems like it should go fast, but it's like, I think it's just that almost to catch every layer of that clay, you just have to go really slow about it. So my wheel speed is like slow, moderate, but my hand motion is what's really, really slow on that part. So if you're working on that trimming technique and you're finding that like you just kind of shave off some layers, but you don't get the clay fully released from the bottom of the pot, that's kind of what happens when you go a little too fast, okay? So that about covers it for today, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found some of this helpful, and if you have any feedback, let us know. I did have one little piece of housekeeping. Our friend of the channel, Michelle, pointed out to me that in our glaze techniques to try at home video, I did a finger test where I dipped my finger into a glaze to show that it was coating my finger, and she pointed out that the glaze was too thin, and she was correct. You know, we had known the glaze was a bit thin that day, but we just had limited time to shoot, so we went with it. But I did want to just quickly say, if you're checking the thickness of a glaze, what you really would be looking for in a finger test would be like pancake batter consistency. That can always vary. I usually keep my glazes a little thinner because I like to layer. But yeah, that was not the perfect finger test on that video. So anyway, we just wanted to circle back and address that. Thanks again. Find us on any of the normal places if you have feedback for us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye, Potters.